Today, shrouds can be weaponized. People will find a way to do it.
What is that?
Hi, I'm David Cronenberg, the writer and director of The Shrouds. I'm at the IndieWire studio in New York, and we're about to discuss my movie on the Toolkit podcast.
There's a line, I think it might, right in the beginning. Grief is rotting your teeth, the dentist tells Vincent Castle. Right from the start, and I think I also read somewhere that maybe some of the first images you started with were Vincent going down. That's it, when he's in the dentist chair going down and watching the body deteriorate. Grief is a very physical thing in this movie, right?
Yeah, I think grief is always very physical. But then, of course, I think everything is physical, you know. The mantra from my last movie, Crimes of the Future, was body is reality. And I think I take that literally, you know. The way that we understand the universe is because of the way our eyes work or hearing works. And if you're in a room with your pet dog and you think you're occupying the same space, you are not. The dog's sense of smell is different. Its color is different, eyes different. Everything is different. The dog's reality is dependent on the dog's body, and so is yours, dependent on your body.
Obviously, the importance of the body in your films is something that everybody's been writing about or has been talking about for a while. Is that something you've always been conscious of, or is this something that just kind of came naturally artistically?
It really come naturally. I mean, the only reason I even think about it and feel the need to articulate it is because it's mentioned all the time. You know, normally I would think it's just the same for everybody. Yeah. Obviously, it isn't. But it's you know, as an atheist, I don't believe in an afterlife. I don't believe in a spirit or a soul that's separate from the body. To me, body is reality in that way as well, that we are our bodies. I don't find that scary or sad or weird, or to me it's just obvious, actually. And then when we die, our body dies, we are gone. It's oblivion. We don't exist anymore. Christopher Hitchens, you know, the sort of polemicist, philosopher English, said, death causes religion. And I think that's true. Every religion offers you a way to evade the reality of your own mortality. And that's why I think religions basically do exist. There are other reasons, but that is the basic. So for me, also as a filmmaker, it occurred to me when I was forced to think about it, that what we photograph most as filmmakers is the human body. That's our subject matter. And it makes sense because as an artist, to me, you are in one way or another exploring the human condition. You're examining it. You're trying to understand it. The human condition, the human body, they go together, especially if you're a filmmaker.
I saw somewhere when you were going through your grief process after your wife died that you had read kind of all the big books, and what you just described to me wasn't necessarily something that you were finding, that what you were experiencing weren't. Yeah. That's not, what you're describing is not in those, right?
Yeah, I mean, in particular, I read the C.S. Lewis book and the Julian Barnes book and of course, Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking about the death of her husband primarily. And then, for example, in her book, I found that her sense of loss and separation didn't seem to her to be physical. You know, she didn't ever mention really the loss of her husband's body. It was his voice and his wit and his humor and all of those things and his talent, his insights, but not the body. And I found that was completely strange to me. For me, it was first is the body, the loss of that body. Of course, that incorporates the voice and all of the wit and humor, but it's encapsulated, it's embodied by the body.
When someone does experience loss, and my wife and I just went through this with a young woman that was in our life who died suddenly, and there's an aspect of the questions which can lead to conspiracies to a certain to a certain degree. You know, what if this happened, or what if that died? You know, it's like, and I think that also happens probably when someone is in the process of dying and you're overseeing their care. I don't know how much of this is something that you experience, but it's interesting how that manifests itself in this movie. Yes. Because it feels like that very natural thing that, you know, I've experienced and I think other people have experienced is a little bit of a dangerous brew with the digital virtual world in your film.
Yeah, well, if you're helping someone die and you're sort of you were ensnared in the medical environment, the zeitgeist of the medical environment, which is not innately dangerous or conspiratorial, but it's difficult. You're suddenly having to deal with medical terms that you wouldn't normally encounter, with personalities of doctors. It becomes a very sensitive thing. Is this the right doctor? Is this the doctor who understands what the situation really is? Is this doctor somehow malevolent or careless? Or, and it begins with that, because you need an advocate when you're in the medical system. You need somebody there, more than just one person, because also the information can be overwhelming about the things that you have to take, and the radiologist is another personality, and the chemotherapist is another personality, and sometimes they clash, and are you in the right clinic? So it inspires distrust and worry and guilt as well. Are you doing the right thing? Have you done enough? Did you do enough? So I think it automatically segues into another environment, which is the techno environment. Now you look up, first you go to Wikipedia, and then there are all the other medical websites that talk to you about your particular disease and the particular drug that you're having to take and so on. So they all mirror each other and become enmeshed in each other. And it can be quite a rabbit hole that you go down. To me, that was just a natural segue to the setup that I have in the movie. And I realize that there's a section of the movie where it starts to slant towards conspiracy theories and competing theories and personalities and stuff. And I think that threw some, certainly, reviewers who thought that it was sort of an unraveling or an inability to resolve. But for me, there is no resolution. You're asking for something that doesn't exist. If you ask for a sort of a well-made play that ties up every little loose thread,
It's interesting because I'm sure what you're describing was a personal thing, but it's. I was finding this quote about your process. I have often explained it this way. I find some interesting things, imagistic things, conceptual things, philosophical things, and I wind them all together in some sort of narrative. I'm experimenting. I'm challenging myself. It's more like I was mastering myself rather than the audience. I'm curious, in context of what we're talking about, like those connections, was that something that just kind of happened where your mind went to go further into this technology and AI?
Yeah, you have to remember that, well, you don't have to, but you should, that there's a sense of play and creativity in creating a narrative and creating fictional characters. And although, obviously the impetus to make this movie was my wife's death and my feelings about that, that's only just the beginning.
Right.
But as soon as you start to write the script, you're writing fiction, you're creating characters who never existed before, and you want them to be different. You want them to come alive and not be you, be somebody else. And they push you around. They say things you never expected them to say. It's quite exciting when that happens, because it means they're coming alive, these characters. At that point, you're also, what are people's expectations of a film narrative? What is satisfying? And different people have different expectations of what they expect from a movie and what they want from a movie. And sometimes you just want a really neat little detective story that wraps everything up with the revelation of the killer. It could be Agatha Christie. But sometimes you want something that reflects life as it really is lived more, which is that it can be very confusing and not resolving, gives you the unsettling sense that things just never do get resolved, except by death, which is the ultimate resolution.
I'd read that this had started as a Netflix series and that you had written the first 2 scripts, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, but that when it became a movie, those first 2 scripts, those first 2 episodes weren't terribly different. I mean, I'm sure you made some adjustments then for the script. And it's interesting in context of what you're saying. And it's so your films. Normally when you would write a series, you're setting up all these things that would go on. Yeah. And there's something about these, especially the conspiracy storylines or going to Iceland or going to Hungary, that just ends, that works really well in your film. And you wouldn't think that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad you think that. Yeah. Conspiracy never ends, let's face it. I mean, if you're really a conspiracy theorist, you don't really want to know and have it end. You don't really want a revelation of who the bad guys are, and that's it. Because it's exciting. It's a creative thing. I mean, for a lot of people, conspiracy is something that empowers them, makes them feel very special. They have knowledge that other people don't have. They see through the facade that other people do not see through, and it really gives you meaning for things that, in essence, to me, are in fact meaningless. I mean, death is meaningless in the sort of overall scheme of things. If you're an atheist, for example, you don't say, God wanted this person for some purpose and took this person away by having them die. But, so for some people that's meaning, but for me that's not meaning. It's meaningless.
Were you surprised how much a 2-episode beginning of a series would work as a movie script? Were you expecting to?
No. I mean, I think the first episode really sets things up, but the second episode took place in Iceland, totally, in Reykjavik and around in small towns and stuff. So it's not really a sort of stick them together and you've got a movie. A lot of stuff, for example, the Budapest stuff, that they're going to Budapest was anticipated in the what Netflix calls the prototype, which was the first episode. The other stuff, the Icelandic stuff, is still in the movie, but it's on a phone, So we did shoot some stuff in Iceland. I wasn't there. I did it by proxy, which is very typical of what the movie is talking about.
Because he's like FaceTiming with the person.
Yes. So it was quite a rewrite. It wasn't just a fusion of the 2 episodes at all.
What would it have been? It's funny because it is so satisfying the way this ends. I'm curious what were you interested in exploring in a series? Because it's hard for me to imagine. It's just so satisfying as a movie. I'm wondering what.
Well, once again, thank you for saying that. Yeah, well, I thought my pitch to Netflix, and maybe this became problematic, was that every week would be a different city, a different culture, a different country.
Okay.
So 8 episodes, 8 countries. That's a lot of money, and maybe it was too expensive, although they never said that to me. As at one point, Karsh, the character played by Vincent Cassel, says, it's always a fusion of politics, religion, and money, a very complex, dangerous kind of fusion when you're dealing with burial. And I figured in each country he would run into all of those things and would meet some very interesting characters and have to solve many problems. And sometimes he would successfully start to establish a cemetery in that country, and in other countries it would be a failure, and maybe there would be a danger to his life because of religious fanaticism or whatever. So I didn't know exactly where it would lead, but I could see it could be quite juicy and quite delicious to go to all those. And I did a lot of research about burial customs, and my God, I mean, they're infinite, really, on this planet, and also sometimes very bizarre. And I say maybe much more extreme than my sort of grave tech cemeteries, quite frankly. But that would be really interesting. And it will lead you to having to comment on the human condition as it is lived in those various countries and cultures. It would have been pretty interesting. But I'm glad that you feel that it was satisfying as a movie, because I would want it to be.
Well, that series does sound like good, though. Okay, so that was, but it is different. Interview a lot of directors have sat in their chair, and a few of them have admitted to me, and I think a lot of them feel this way, that they avoid modern life, portraying modern life, and some have even been very clear about it. I don't want a world of screens. I find it uncinematic. And it's interesting, that's not you. You kind of embrace this full on, like not only the looking at us right now, but also the screen aspect of it.
Well, it was interesting doing A Dangerous Method, which was a biopic about Freud and Jung, pre-screens. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it is kind of a luxury to be able to forget about that, about the internet and about phones and people on phones. But if you're going to do modern life, if you're really going to engage with it, you have to engage with it. You have to engage with it as it is. And I I don't find that intimidating. I just find it interesting and something that I was quite fine to do, especially in this movie. I think the use of screens and so on in the movie, and including in Karsh's Tesla, which has a different story to it. It's just normal. I mean, I didn't force it. People in the movie use the phone when they would have used the phone. They're on the internet when they would have been on the internet. Anybody. Same with what they might do with their screen in their car if they had a car with a screen. So I didn't think I was forcing it. I think I was just observing it, frankly.
Well, one thing you do, because I think a lot of filmmakers struggle with it, is like how to make it narrative, how to make it work cinematically. And one thing that was really impressive to me about the Shrouds is as it got into this technology, there is something very enticing about it, alluring about it, but there's also something sinister about it. And so as a story, it's like our relationship to that screen isn't just purely information. It's both the sinister and what's enticing about it.
Yeah. Well, it's also, once again, it's nice for conspiracies, and also to try to define what is real and what is not, and how do you define reality and not reality. I think it's quite upfront right now. People worrying about scams, about impersonation, about AIs. Scamsters, creating artificial people to take your money, who phone you up. All of that is because people are very accessible now in a way that they weren't before, especially if you're on social media. I'm not on any social media, so and my reason for that is I just don't want to be that accessible. But most people I know are totally on social media, especially young people. I don't think they could live without it. And yet the potential for all kinds of, especially with sudden rise of very sophisticated AI, has exacerbated the sort of sinister elements possible in our screens and our internet communications.
You're always so good, and this film's a perfect example of it, there is a future. There is a futurist aspect to it, but it's so tangible. It feels so relatable to now, and you've always found that line. I'm wondering, with this film and just in general, your process, because I imagine it takes a lot of research. Like, are you reading? Are you keeping up to date on all of these issues and these technology? Are you trying these tools? Because I mean, there's something about it that feels so tangible and of the now.
Well, I guess I've been a nerd for a long time, and I wrote my first screenplay on a computer in 1984, actually,
Which is before most people, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not afraid of it. And I understand it, and I'm fluent in it. Not that I'm a hacker or anything, but I don't write code. But so it feels very natural and second nature to me. And who would have known that the overwhelming dominance that it has become, what with satellites and satellite imagery and the use of it by the military and drones and all of that. But to me, I've been interested in it, but not obsessive, and I don't think I've been reading about it, for example, or delving into it more than just a normal person who might be interested in it. But it's true that a lot of 82-year-olds, which is my age, are not very fluent. But I tell you, I have hearing aids that I'm wearing right now that have an artificial intelligence chip. It's only about a new thing a year ago. And it's quite sophisticated. I mean, you can program your own, create your own programs for your hearing and stuff. And it's true that a lot of oldsters would not be able to deal with it. I mean, even just the mobility of your hands, the flexibility of your hands as you get older can deteriorate. Tricky to use. But for me, it's like I've had cataract eye surgery. So I'm looking at you through plastic lenses. I'm hearing you through hearing aids that are curating your voice as per my programming. So it's very personal to me, And honestly, I do drive a Tesla, and as Karsh does in the movie, and I let the Tesla drive a lot on autopilot. I think it's terrific. Sometimes it's a better driver than I am. I have to say. So why not? So I'm personally embedded in it. It's not a matter of research.
it's not even about your age because you've been doing this for many decades. Is that something that is just a natural thing for you to find where that line is of fiction, science fiction, but also something – because your films do it so well. It feels like Shrouds feels like now, although we're very aware of certain things in this film being sci-fi. Yeah. Is that something that's just a skill or a – because you know what I'm talking about, right? That's
I do know what
hard,
you're talking about. Yeah, I think it is just very natural for me because I can always feel when I've gotten outside of the human realm, you know. For me, technology is very human, and it's always telling us about ourselves. It's not something that's from outer space like in the 1940s and 50s, alien technology, non-human technology. For me, technology is 100% human. So I can always tell when I've gone that little bit further and suddenly I'm talking about technology that's no longer connected to the body, to human interest, human emotion. It always has to have an emotional connection. And so it's not something I have to really think about much. I can just feel it when it's going wrong.
Natural instinct as a storyteller. Could you talk a little bit about your process of creating Honey, both in the writing phase, but also I imagine working with collaborators to make that? Because I'll say I get pitched a lot of AI companion type things. It's going to make, and they all kind of are not accessible, at least at this phase, or anything that I would use. And the first half of your movie, I was like, oh, I could use a Honey. You know, like I feel like that there's something there. And I'm just wondering what that process was like, not only just creatively, but then also making it a reality.
Well, of course, I wrote her as a sort of thinking of Karsh and his mourning, and thinking that he needed to have a sort of avatar, AI avatar that would talk to him and guide him and remind him of things. And because you know your phone will do that too. It'll nudge you. It'll be a nanny you. It'll remind you of stuff. You have your watch. It tells you didn't do this, not enough steps. You know. So this is just going a little step further, which is not uncommon. And he wanted it to remind him of his dead wife, but not in an uncanny valley kind of way where it was really spookily realistic, because that would have been too painful. So he had that little balance happening there. So she's a bit cartoony rather than what we actually are finding right now, is that people are having AI avatars of dead people that they loved. That are the uncanny valley thing, because of phones and so on, there's now, unlike in the past, every single person there's a whole wealth of data about their voice, what their voices were like, what their bodies were like, what their faces were like, what their clothes were like. And so you can now, for the first time, you could create a sort of an uncannily realistic version of that dead person in your life. That's not what Karsh is wanting to do with Honey. He wants something that's still distant from him. So to do that, we had Diane Kruger, who is playing both Becca and Terry, her sister, is also playing Honey. And so
she is Honey.
Yeah,
okay.
She is Honey. So it's her voice. We did the sort of traditional motion capture suit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with the sensors everywhere.
All right.
And the camera looking right into her eyes, and her mouth being recorded. And she's acting in a warehouse that's surrounded by 14 cameras as well. And I'm directing her over the monitor, you know. So she is acting Honey and doing all the moves and everything. And then from that motion capture data, we dress her. For example, the Yves Saint Laurent company co-financed the movie and is co-producing the movie. So they wanted Honey to wear, this some Yves Saint Laurent stuff, and I said that's fine. But it's a cartoon version of Yves Saint Laurent that was just kind of endearing. She has a sort of polka dot scarf, and it's which is a cartoon version of a real Saint Laurent, very expensive scarf. So it was all of those things together. But it was, as has been done many times before, using motion capture to create creatures for Lord of the Rings and so on.
No wonder it feels so. There is a something very human about,
It's pretty human. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as you said, not Uncanny Valley. I mean, it's a cartoon, but the interaction, hopefully. No wonder I haven't seen AI like that. It's Diane Kruger AI directed by David Cronenberg. That makes a lot more sense. Researching for this interview, I discovered something about you that surprised me quite a bit about your process. You were talking about writing, and you were saying that while you're writing, you're not thinking about rhythms. You're not thinking about editing. You're not even thinking about how you're going to shoot the film. You're not a storyboarder. Sounds like a pure writing process. I'm curious then, once the script is done, what is your process of then putting on your director's hat? Because it doesn't seem like most writer-directors that I talk to, they're almost thinking in imagery as they're writing and thinking about the cinema aspect.
Yeah. No, I mean, to me, the dialogue is as important as the visuals. I mean, I was just talking to Amy Tobin about she says it's not action. There's not much action. It's dialogue, and I said the dialogue is action. That for me they're the same, and I've never thought of film as being only visual. Primary. It's dialogue to me is incredibly important. So. Yeah, I don't really, I write it as precisely as I can. Like, let's say the description of what the Shrouds would look like, or when I wrote The Fly, what the telepod would look like. But then I don't worry about it past that, because I know that I'm going to have a group of collaborators, mostly whom I've worked with before, who will help me realize what those things are. So if you read my script, you would say, the Shrouds that ended up in the movie don't look anything like what you described. And that's true. And it's because, we start to talk about it. And that's when the process happens. When you've got a crew, when the movie's financed, it's not worth worrying about if you don't have the money and the crew, and the actors. So it's, I really embrace the collaborative nature of it, including with the actors. And by the same token, for example, Diane Kruger was really shocked when she came to Toronto to start to shoot, because she expected to do rehearsals, because there is a lot of dialogue in the movie. I don't rehearse. And I said, Diane, I trust your instinct. And I can say to young filmmakers, casting is a huge part of directing. It's not very much recognized, and I think they don't teach that in film school. They teach you about cameras and sound and so on, but casting is more than half the battle when it comes to creating a character. So you get an actor whose instincts you trust, and you want them. The first time I hear the dialogue is when we're blocking the scene, not when we're rehearsing. That's when I first hear my dialogue actually spoken. It's before that, it's all in my head. And it's usually a pleasant shock, because the actors bring it to life, and their instinct tells them exactly what to do. And I do minimal directing in that sense. So I often say the script is really the director in terms of the actors, and it is and it's true for the crew as well. It's really a plan, a suggestion for your crew to actually start working on, to actualize these things physically. And usually there's a lot of difference between what I've written in the script and what we end up with on screen.
I think the thing, and this is a hard one to maybe answer too, is your films have such distinct tones and rhythms and pace. And so that's a little bit of where and maybe they just get it, but I don't know that, or maybe that's in the editing room, maybe that's the music, but there is something about the tone that I'm surprised is just kind of universal without having rehearsed it.
The thing about rehearsal is I tried it a couple of times, and I talked to Paul Schrader about this not long ago in Toronto, where he said, rehearsal is everything. And yeah. I said, Paul, for me, rehearsal is nothing. It works for you, it doesn't work for me. And I found that you're sitting around a table with your actors like theater, and you're reading the script. And by the time you get to the set, everything has changed. You're in the real set with the real costumes, the real special effects, the real camera, the real lighting, and the dynamic changes because of those things. You're not sitting around a table. And I found that everything that we had done was useless, actually. And in fact, sometimes counterproductive, because it sometimes locked the actors into something that was no longer relevant. So that is and I'm sure that somebody like Paul could explain to you why I'm wrong about that. But in each case, it's, if you end up with a good film, you end up with a good film.
Just to go back to the Netflix aspect of this for a second, there was an idea, and I think you explained why that series might have been a little more ambitious than they wanted. But there was a time when series, like an ambitious series like that from a director like you, was something that streaming seemed to be interested in. Yeah. And I'm curious, again, you can only speak of your own experience, or both your children or two of your children are now directors too, so maybe you can speak of their experience. But is it harder for you to make the type of films that you make at this stage? You started in the mid '70s, and now we're in the mid 2020s. So you've got a nice stretch here. Is it harder now?
It's gone up and down. I mean, it really is very dependent on tariffs. Mm-hmm. It's dependent on the economy in general, about how confident people are in financing, and so I can't say that it's better or worse than a 1978. Mm-hmm. But right now, if you're making an independent film, it's tough. It's definitely tough. I have a daughter and a son who've both directed movies. And
your son's been on this podcast with my partner Jim. So
good. Yeah.
You're the second Cronenberg we've had here.
Yes, and there's another one out there too. Yeah, it's tough right now, definitely. And I know this not because of me, but because of my producers who tell me it's tough. When it's not so tough, there's more money, more. I mean, the Shrouds has half the budget that I had for Crimes of the Future. And I don't think we could have raised any more, actually. Where it will go the next time, by the time I'm ready to do another movie, who knows? I mean, it's hard to say. But the world economy affects you as a filmmaker directly, because a lot of the financing comes through government, and they're, of course, affected by all of those things as well. So it's tricky. It's tricky.
Is there a lot of questions right now? You've brought up the world economy and tariffs. From a Canadian filmmaker perspective, is there a lot of uncertainty about how all this global economy, things that are in our news, is going to affect?
Absolutely. And because the film business is a business, mm-hmm. And when the film industry is in an industry on a certain level, a lot of technology, a lot of money, a lot of trucks, a lot of people, so we're susceptible to the same forces that any other business is. And when people are worried about having to lay people off, because in the auto industry, I mean, the auto industry is huge worldwide, and in Canada, we've already started to lay people off because of, in particular, because of the tariffs situation. So we have to worry about it. We're not immune to it. Most of my films have been co-productions between Canada and some European country. It was Greece for the last film, and it's Canada, France for the Shrouds. But those countries are also susceptible to the winds of economic change, shall we say. So, we're susceptible. You could have a great script and even have some very attractive financeable actors and find out that you can't raise the budget that you need for the film. That is a reality right now.
You've been making films for 50 years, coming to the United States to do publicity for them for many years. You were just here this fall for New York Film Festival with this film. I'm curious, in context of where we are in April 2025, has coming here to do press for this film been different in the sense of, is there a chilling effect? Because I'm feeling it as a filmmaker, speaking about things. Is that something? I know you've been negative. You've said the same type of things that we've all said about Trump, not anything more egregious or less. Yeah. But is that something coming down here that was actually in the back of your mind in a way that it hasn't been?
It absolutely has been. And I noted with my assistant, I was traveling with my executive assistant, the airport was empty on the section that was flights to the U.S. Empty. I mean, it was shockingly empty. You got through security very quickly. And I thought I had to think in anticipating going, because we do border control to the U.S. in Pearson Airport in Toronto, rather than waiting till we got to New York. And I was thinking, I had to think, if they ask me for my phone, I'm going to refuse to give it to them, and then I'll probably be denied entry. And I thought the mere fact that I had to think about that as a real possibility, it was incredibly depressing and sad. I mean, I've been coming to New York since the 1940s because I had an uncle who was a professor here at New York City College. And so my family and I would come to New York and Washington as well all the time. My father was born in Baltimore, so the interrelations are very close. And to think that you could have to worry about something like that. And of course, I had to make jokes about, I hear that El Salvador is nice weather this time of year, and then, of course, when I went there were some very bored border control agents who just said, where are you going? We said, New York. He said, oh, have a good time. He didn't even ask me how long I was going to stay, which you would normally be asked, and why are you going? No. So it came to not a problem. But it doesn't convince me that it might not be a problem the next time, So that's sad. And for Canadians, it's enraging and also depressing. And I know that it is the same for a lot of Americans.
Well, that's not the answer I wanted, but that's one I kind of anticipated. It's sad to hear. Last one, and you're a fairly humble man, so this will probably embarrass you, but, your films have always been so original. And, we talked earlier about how the body just kind of naturally comes to you in these creative processes. And obviously, you're not someone that's been influenced by a lot of films. I'm sure you watch a lot of films, but it's not like a derivative thing. I'm very curious to watch, and that's what we love about your work. I'm very curious to watch how your work has also inspired almost a subgenre. We had not that long ago, Carly talking about The Substance, and I might as well have been a deconstruction of David Cronenberg in terms of how much, she was speaking within this language that you created. And I'm wondering what that's like for you because your work has always been so original and so specific to you, but then to see not only that it's appreciated, but that it's led to a lot of films and almost a subgenre.
Well, that's actually very sweet. I know I've met Coralie Farja in Cannes, and I've also met Julie Ducournau, who won the Palme d'Or for Titane, which is also sort of, if you call it body horror, whatever that means, I actually don't know. But
I think we could call it Cronenbergian. I think honestly, it's her own thing, but I don't know that film exists before.
Well, so yeah, it's the Coralie and Julie, like my cinematic daughters, let's say, and I find it to be very sweet, and especially they don't deny. They say they've been very influenced by me and so on. So I find that quite sweet. I don't find it negative in any way, really.
Well, thank you for this film. Thank you for all your films, and best of luck with it.
Thanks very much. Thank you.